Howdy, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. We are 9 days away from the NHL trade deadline, and nothing has happened yet. And I don't know whether that's for any reason, but we'll see. But we'll discuss that in a few minutes. Zach will be joining us, but we start, as always, with the pre-show. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, so I want to bring up something that I think covers a few different sports for an argument. I wrote about this for Full Press today for baseball. You can go Full Press MLB. So everybody's kind of wondering on like Twitter, where's Madison Bumgarner? And the interesting thing is he's only 34. And I hear this all the time. Well, Russ, why are you saying you shouldn't sign a player to a 4 or 5 year contract? He's 29 or he's 30. Well, I'm learning, and I hope everybody else is starting to learn, that in all pro sports, it's different than it was in the old days. They're higher impact. They're harder to stay healthy in.
Right.
And 29 now, I think, is like 33 then, back when I was growing up. And so, as an example, Madison Bumgarner at 34, nobody really wants him, but he's been bad for 3 to 4 years, and Arizona signed him to a mega contract. He was getting over $23 million a year for the last 3 years of his deal with them.
Yeah.
And got virtually nothing. They got a 15-30 record. So I think it's a cautionary tale. Like when we talk about defensemen, Russ, what are you talking about? This guy's 29. You could sign him to a 5-year deal. What do you mean? And I'm like, be careful about that.
Well, and Kev, there doesn't seem to be any patience at all any longer in all these sports when it comes to the aging guy. Like, yeah, I remember like Jamie Moyer, who pitched into his late 40s, and he was a junk ball lefty, but he was still effective into his 40s. And, Bumgarner has that record of, pitching really well in the playoffs. He hasn't pitched well lately. I'm surprised somebody doesn't give him a shot at a 1-year, $1 million contract unless he won't take that. I'm not sure what the dynamic there is, but there doesn't seem to be that willingness in most sports to give that veteran guy a shot.
Well, I think it's selective. I mean, there's a guy like Carlos Santana, like teams trip all over themselves to keep him in the league, and he'll be 38 years old this year. And we have in the NHL, Sidney Crosby having one of his best seasons.
Right.
He's an older player as well. So I'm not sure that it's, I'm not sure I buy that, 29 is the same as 34. But I do think because of the contracts, as Russ pointed out, they're being a lot more careful now about what they're going to do on that. But I think they're going to take it by a kind of a case by case situation, sort of analyze where the guy's at. And, in Detroit, the team that I cover, the Red Wings, the GM just doesn't like to give out term. And he begrudgingly gave it to Larkin, Dylan Larkin, but everybody else has pretty much been, 4-year deals. And so it's going to be interesting to see what he does with Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond this summer.
Yeah, but he'll probably be more willing to with those guys since they're in their early 20s and they'll get them for their entire prime. I'll just going back to the pitching thing, and then we'll start the show. And I'll continue to say this until either he gets signed or or it's proven that he's completely blackballed. Trevor Bauer was cleared. Trevor Bauer, now, there's a lot of baggage there. There's a lot of, stuff there. But, we've had players in Major League Baseball who abused their wives and they got jobs in Major League Baseball. This guy was cleared of any wrongdoing. And I'm surprised. This is a Cy Young award-winning pitcher. I'm surprised nobody has given him a 1-year deal and said, okay, we'll see. It's like, Peter, is it like that these teams are so afraid of the backlash of a player that has some sort of issue, even if he's cleared, they don't want to touch it. It's radioactive.
I think there's a pulse that's coming through with society right now that just says we need to treat people for the crime. They need to have the stigma of the crimes they're at, or they've been accused of or been associated with, as part of everything. And because you're a a sports superstar, notable, you don't get a pass anymore like you have in the past. I don't know if it's right or wrong because, as you just said, even if you've been cleared, the stigma still sticks with you, right?
Sure.
And should that happen, does everyone deserve a second chance? Yeah, I think people do, depending on what you're getting the second chance from. But it's a tough one. Society is kind of changing in a certain way, and we have to adapt in some way to that.
Yeah. I mean.
And then if you couple that with there's some guy out there for Barstool, Marty Mush, who got multiple hits off Trevor Bauer in a pitching session recently. That doesn't bode well for Trevor Bauer's future.
No, I mean, I watched the video. He struck the guy out too, Russ. So it's like, I mean,
yeah, but if you get a guy off the street that can get hits off him, why am I giving him a lot of money?
The guy looked like Luke Voigt, so he didn't. And maybe.
Okay.
I think it's more of what Peter's talking about. I think even in the last year, there's been a change in how we view these situations. Like you answered your own question when you said, teams are just, view this person as radioactive. And, plus he kind of opens his mouth a little bit too and doesn't like talking about it.
He's got a reputation.
Right.
And that might be the problem, Kev, because, the example, and like I said, after this we'll start. Matt Ariza, the kid that the Bills drafted in the 5th round, he was accused of something. He was completely cleared. The Bills cut him because at that point, it was sort of damage control. And then what happened? He was cleared, and the Kansas City Chiefs just signed him, and he was completely cleared. He was not charged. I hope he has a good career. I wish the Bills would have signed him. Would have re-signed him because he's got a great leg. Now, had there been charges and he'd never play football. Let's start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, February 28th, 2024.
I'm Ekman. Sorry. Sorry, just finishing up this talk with it. I'm just texting the source right now. I'll be right there.
Let's go right to left. Go.
I'm Pete Tessier in balmy Winnipeg.
Russ Cohen, NHLDraftBuzz.com.
Kevin Allen, and if we're going to talk about weather, I got to bring up that it was 61 last night driving home from the game, and then I got hail pelting my car, and today there's snow flurries outside my window. So it's a crazy world.
It's absolutely bizarre. And this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. While Eck is talking to his source, I do want to touch, and since we have Peter here, yesterday Gary Bettman and Bill Daly were in Winnipeg. And Peter, the gist I got, I understand why they went there, but it was like they went to Winnipeg and they said, hey, everything's fine. This is a great franchise. Okay, then why are you there?
It was a regularly scheduled visit. This was in the works. It was part of his regular tour that he did. And I think
was it? I don't know, because
no, it was. It was.
Even with the panels. Even with the panels, it was.
Well, because of the interview with Chris Johnson in The Athletic, it became more than it was. And it sort of came in. He's just doing his regular thing, him and Bill, and they were, flew on the jet. I don't know, probably flew home last night as they tend to do, and watched a game, met with some people, met with some sponsors, met with some business community privately, and then did that session that you saw Russ on.
I watched it. I have a few takeaways. So my first takeaway is,
go ahead.
When they sort of blame the franchise, hey, maybe you should have kept 4,000 or 5,000 seats aside for corporate sales at the very beginning, but hey, that was in the past. Okay. But then somebody did try to ask the question about them only having about 15% corporate support, and they sidestepped that. And then basically in the end, the overriding thing was, hey, just come out and see them. It's not that simple. Like, they did talk about the in-game experience a little bit, but not to the degree that Pete has. And I think Pete has a better handle on it than really what Gary Bettman found out about yesterday.
If Gary Bettman is worrying about in-game experiences and stuff for 32 franchises, then he's got way too much time on his hands.
No, he's not.
Right. Like, but he's talking about it. I think, he made the point that we always knew that with this building and this market, that it needed to have a guaranteed 13-5 in the building each game to work long term. And I think that's the part that's gotten lost in a lot of this is long term. You know, I wrote a long series of tweets. I think it was 25 on Saturday because there's a lot of noise coming out about that article and stuff. And some local media had written about it too. I think we have to remember some cyclical things around markets. And I didn't even get into this because at 25 tweets in a series, you're really pushing the boundaries. But people forget there were only 2 franchises in Canada in the 90s who were safe at one point, guaranteed to be safe. Right. And you don't need to guess who they were.
Right.
A large national, like the Walgreens of Canada called Shoppers Drug Mart, they bought bulk tickets in every market other than Toronto and Montreal. And they would use that as a discount promo to come in and help buy tickets to boost the season tickets and stuff. Right. That was when the Canadian dollar was really terrible. Right. But it happens. The stakes are just bigger right now because there's just that much more money there. People are way more aware of things. And Winnipeg has, unfortunately, a very frail psyche about its civic image and the pride in it. And if you really want to there's a lot of reasons to be critical of True North. There's a lot of reasons to be critical of Mark Chipman and his approach to things. I think the biggest thing that really surprises me is as a guy who built his family wealth in the auto industry, which had a fundamental shift about 25, 30 years ago from just selling cars to long-term service relationships. He should have understood that's the nature of sports, and sports fans are even more fickle than people who buy cars, right? And he should have known that, and he should have built some of that knowledge and the way they collected data on people, the way they looked at things into the management and the relationship building within Winnipeg. And we probably wouldn't see things as dire. Well, and I guess they're not that dire, but as significant a drop as we saw. And that's really what it is. In the end, if Gary Bettman was going to sound the alarm, I don't think he's afraid to do it.
Right.
I think, Kevin, you would agree with that. If Gary sees a problem, he would probably call it out.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is related to the idea that it speaks to what hockey's problem is, which is that it remains a gate revenue-driven league.
Yes.
And so as much as we say, when people are saying it's better for the league when Toronto and Montreal and the New York Rangers and the Detroit Red Wings are all making the playoffs, what they're really talking about, even though the dollar signs never come out, is the money that is generated by the playoffs. In those major cities, you can charge beaucoup dollars for playoff tickets, and that keeps the revenue high, and of course the players get a 50% split of all that. Well, in the same token, you got to make sure that your lower revenue teams, the gate teams, and Winnipeg being among them, you got to make sure they're perfect, because you can't have any slip ups there and losing any money on the bottom end, because you don't really know, especially in a 32 team league with only 16 make it, whether your big heavyweights are going to make the playoffs. We're going to have the Montreal Canadiens. They're not going to be in again. So, that's important. So that's why I think, when something like this happens in Winnipeg, it gets written about just because the league office is sort of where, and, are you only as strong as your weakest links? Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily true, but I think you do have to concern yourself that everything is going absolutely perfectly in those environments.
Well, one thing about the in-game experience, it was announced yesterday that the Sabres are putting a new scoreboard in at the KeyBank Center and a new roof. And I can tell you that the fans here don't give a damn about the new scoreboard. They care about the fact that the team hasn't made the playoffs in 13 years. Don't get me wrong. They'll like the new scoreboard, but they want playoff hockey and they're not getting it.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Kevin, I wanted to ask you on this, and maybe it's just my conspiratorial mind here. It's sort of like, hey, look over here, folks, about Winnipeg, and nobody's talking about Arizona for the last week or so. They're all talking about Winnipeg being in trouble when Arizona is a complete friggin' joke. And they still haven't announced that plot of land that they were supposedly supposed to buy.
Yeah, well, again, it's always about money, and I don't think you need to be a conspiratorial person to realize that. In my estimation, this is all about the markets that people think you're going to ship Arizona to. They want for expansion and the entry fees for that. But just getting back to what you're saying about in-game experiences. As usual, Mike, you're both right and wrong. Certainly, it's all about making playoffs. Like, no one's going to argue that. But anyone that thinks that the fan base doesn't care about what happens within a game, don't realize the lesson of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who was among the first to put that in-game experience. And now, when people say, just going to a Tampa Bay game, it's like such a great experience. Now, it helped that they had a great team too, but they also had a lot going on. And in Detroit, they have this between periods almost broadcast within the arena, and they got rid of that. And there's been a complete backlash to that. People like that, and it's not. They said, well, we wanted to do more, in game, but the lesson they learned is you got to do it all. I mean, it's got to be all done. When you're asking people to pay, and in Detroit, the lower level tickets are highly expensive. You got to do it all. You got to have an in-game experience. You got to have a successful team. You got to, it's got to be convenient. You got to have wide concourses. It's, all of that. It's the only way you can, people feel like you should get your money's worth for a couple $100 a ticket.
Now, and I'm sure X is going to want to talk about, what the rumors du jour, and we've got 9 days until the deadline. But I wanted to start off here because Russ and I were talking about this.
Can I throw something in about Winnipeg for a second, though?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you remember right, when the whole Winnipeg team was bought from Atlanta years ago, there was always this feeling of like, okay, they're going to Winnipeg. It felt like a strange place for this ownership group to go to. Remember, they were from Toronto, correct? They were a Toronto area group, I believe.
Well, the David Thompson, the real estate partner of Mark Chipman, is Thompson Corp, which is he's like the 20th richest man in the world. Right. And but he's not necessarily a Winnipeg guy, right? He's from but he does spend a fair bit of time here. I'm sure he does now with the team there. Yeah. But there was always a fear that Winnipeg was a temporary thing at the time. Do you remember this, Kevin, at all? I remember there was a thing.
Not at all.
I know what you're talking about, Eck. It was, they just hold the franchise, flip it, make a quick bit of money. Yeah. And then we'll find a real home for it. No, that was definitely some speculation there.
Yeah. That is true, but I don't think the league saw him as a placeholder.
No, but the league always has a rule that you can't sell or move a team for a certain amount of time after.
Right. But I think what Winnipeg's advantage was back then, if you remember what was going on, was they couldn't get anybody in Atlanta to buy the team. Yeah. I mean, like no one. And the ownership there had really abdicated responsibility. They tried essentially to turn the keys over to the league, and Gary Bettman said, that's not how it works. Right. You can't just say, I'm not going to pay my mortgage anymore, so you're financially responsible. So, and we've talked about this before, how hard it is. Like, you need time to start a new team up. Like, you need time to market, to hire, to do all that. So when it was all falling apart and they couldn't get anyone to buy it, they needed to go somewhere where they had a pretty good idea. They had everything in place. Right. Well, Winnipeg had everything in place. A little bit smaller arena than they wanted, but they had a team that was playing there. They had a tradition. They had people buying season tickets already. Yeah, it was really good PR at the time too. It felt like this was the perfect place to go. And I think they understood at the time, what the the issues would be as they moved forward. But it's worked out really well, I think. Yeah. the circumstances.
Remember the whole Make It 7 thing that was going on before that, the Buzz Silly thing and all that?
I mean, here's the other thing. I brought this up the other day. Winnipeg had the team in the WHA, and then they didn't. Is this the same thing? Does the market eventually erode there?
Well, the WHA just merged into the to the NHL, right?
Right.
4 teams came in: Edmonton, Hartford, Winnipeg, and Quebec.
Right.
And so, and then there was the disbursement drafts and all that stuff. So, I mean, it didn't erode. It just, what happened? So the origins of the Jets' problems didn't happen in 1995-96 when they finally left. The origins happened in 1992 during the early 90s recession. And they had that old barn. And what happened was a construction company came to the ownership, Barry Shankarow, and said, we will build you an arena because we need something to do. Like we'll do this and we'll give it to you. Like, I mean, dirt cheap, concepts we could never hear about, but that's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
He said no, didn't believe he needed it. That was their chance to modernize, right? At that point, the Canucks were engaged in a new arena. There were some popping up. They finally had, the ball had been moving about mid-90s for Toronto and all that stuff. That was the mistake because they then could not do anything else to increase revenue in there. And Shankarow just had finally had enough, and he sort of shot himself in the foot. He couldn't bring in other investors. If he'd had a new arena, different events, all the other things. You got to remember, the MTS Center before the Jets arrived was in the top 20 venues in North America for revenue based on everything non-professional sports related.
Wow.
So there's a paying public and a demand for that place. They could have had it 20 years earlier.
You have a desperate group of people up there in the freezing cold, Pete, trying to figure out what the hell to do with their time.
Exactly. No, you can't ice fish every day.
I mean, they are good. They are, they put something up. It's like, we're going to go. We'll go.
Yeah.
We'll go. Sure. Something new for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Dustin Bufflin can, Pete.
Well, he can. Exactly.
Let's move on to some rumors here because we do have some things. The person the source I was just talking to, I can't tell who it was, but it was regarding Adam Henrique, which is one of the big rumors that's going on right now. I consider him probably one of the bigger players. His contract obviously is an issue. The third team would probably have to get involved with this one. But it looks like Vegas is definitely jumping into that pool for Adam Henrique. And that's an interesting, I mean, obviously, with Stone going down and all that, but I also heard today that, there's a chance that Toronto jumps in based on some possible injuries that haven't been revealed yet, or something like that, or which is kind of fun.
I mean, okay, if they're talking about Tavares, he's fine. He played yesterday. The only injury that has been a question mark has been Timothy Liljegren, and I mean he's making $1.4 million. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. Honestly, the last thing they're trading for is a forward. It's all right-hand shot defense.
Yeah, no, it would make sense. That's why I was curious. If Tavares, they know something about Tavares that we don't. Like if there's something, like if Tavares needs to have like some kind of surgery that might end his season, then that might be where this is heading. That's
right. That's $11 million off. That's $11 million off your cap. But
it got me into a discussion with the person I was just talking to, which I think is worth discussing here. And that is, quite often we have these like quote unquote superstars at the trade deadline, like Patrick Kane last year, for example, or, and every year there's somebody, a dying contract of a guy that's like a real star. And we always talk about how the players that make the difference at the trade deadline are generally not those guys. They generally those guys get traded for quite a bit of money usually, but they end up, playing 1 round or 2 rounds and being dumped out, where, the Adam Henriques of the world, they are difference makers in the playoffs. This is the kind of guy that matters in a playoff series.
Well,
a lot more. And we don't have the top stars, but we do have a couple of these guys. Like, and he was saying the same thing about Tanev. Tanev is the same kind of thing. He's this 2-way defenseman. This is the kind of guy you want to get in the playoffs, but usually there's bigger star power.
Well, Kev, the biggest guy last year acquired at the deadline that ended up being a key player for the team that eventually won it was Ivan Barbashev with Vegas.
Yeah.
But I was joking with Russ on the show on Monday. the Patrick Kane that's playing in Detroit right now is not the Patrick Kane that the Rangers traded for. Had the Rangers traded for this guy, they would have probably beaten the Devils, and they probably would have made a nice deep run in the playoffs. But he was not that guy last year.
No, he was playing on one leg. Yeah,
He was playing one leg. What are your thoughts on Henrique, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard just as you had that the people are, his contract is just at that point where it's problematic. The 5'8", right?
Yeah.
So if Anaheim retained half, it's still 2.9, and so many teams are kind of capped out.
Yeah.
So that's why it might take a third party to get in there. But I would agree with you that he has a chance of being it. But remember, he's had some off seasons too.
Yeah.
But he's played well this season. So
played well this season, and he has played well in the playoffs when he's been in the playoffs, right? That's the thing. Like he's shown that, and it was only. I mean, we can remember that Devils run that they had, where he was really good. Very interesting. Lou Lamoriello being interviewed on XM said something that we always thought was true with Lou, but I never heard him admit it. I don't know if you guys heard this interview at all, but I never heard him admit it openly. He said, I really like at the trade deadline. What do you like to look for? Well, I like to look for players quite often that I've had before. Whether it's in New Jersey or wherever it is, because those players are a much easier adjustment. And I thought to myself that's a weird thing to say. I get it, sure it is, but is it real? I mean, you're not the coach of the team. You're the GM of the team. How much of a factor should that play into what you're doing? Like Henrique is with the Islanders being on Adam Henrique, it would be doubtful, you would think, because they're not really necessarily in the playoffs. But Adam Henrique is not just a playoff pickup, So it really felt like he was talking about Henrique.
Well, I think they would want to be in on him because they're 23rd in scoring, and they still, I'm bet Lou's feeling a little bit of pressure to make the playoffs here for self-imposed and through ownership.
For sure.
So I could see them being in on that.
Yeah.
They've the same problem that they've had the last couple of 3 years, which is they don't, I don't even think they're at 3 goals per game this year. So
no, they're not. They're under it.
This isn't exactly breaking news, but it sort of locks into place something I think we've known for a couple weeks. Elliot Friedman reporting that the Wild are basically indicating they're not trading Marc-Andre Fleury because they're still in the race. And, Guerin came out like a couple months ago and said, if we're still in the race, we're not trading players. So
but he also said, apparently he also came out and said he wants to kind of ride it out. So
right.
Remember we are in a copycat league. We always have been. We are in a what you've done lately league. And it's no small coincidence that all these bubble teams are talking like that. When you consider where the Florida, that a team from like the Florida Panthers last year finishes in 8th and goes to Stanley Cup Finals. That is something that people pay attention to. They're like, okay, well, they always say we just got to get in, but when it actually is proven that you just got to get in.
But that happens like once a decade.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter to these people.
No, I know you.
I'm not talking against them. I'm just like that is the mentality around owners and things like that. Like they're like, okay, well, we just got to get in. So Minnesota they very much feel like they could get in.
I know you have to sell hope, and if you remember back to that, was it 2012 LA Kings team that snuck in at the end of the year, was 1 versus 8, and then they went all the way and won the cup. I mean, okay, it's possible.
Peter, I still have on my wall written, "Hope is not a plan" from you.
Hope is not a plan.
From a long time ago. It's right.
Right.
In my office wall, I wrote, "Hope is not a plan."
Well, what? I heard a new term today, Eck, that I'm totally going to take ownership of, and it's what a lot of GMs drink: hopium.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, it is a plan for a lot of general managers, because how many times have you talked to a GM in training camp and he starts out the conversation is, if we can get 25 goals out of this guy, maybe 15 out of that guy, and if we get a healthy so-and-so, I mean, they're all on that whole plan, trying to coax more goals or more games in net or better health out of players. And, that's a lot easier if you follow the whole plan than acquiring some guy.
You know what, and Russ or Kevin, that is such an interesting point. You're 100% right. We hope this happens. We hope that. A smart GM a smart communicator would say, we expect 20 goals out of these 4 players, name them, and say, this is why we expect this. This is what we've done to empower them, right? This is our investment.
Mm-hmm.
And and then there's a different thing about, well, you're taking away hope. And if it doesn't happen, this is what we've done to do this. It's on them. Right. And I think and let's go back to using LA. What kind of hope is that franchise and fan base dealing with Pierre-Luc Dubois right now? Because honestly, you hope you can get 10 goals. I don't know what he has right now, but you hope he maybe gets 20. But really, they expected 70, 80 points out of them. And he's not even going to sniff that.
He was expected to be like the heir apparent to Kopitar, and he has just been an absolute dramatic bust.
It feels so much like Ryan Johansson in so many ways, because it's like, to me, both coming out of Columbus, both being such high prospects, both obviously having talent, showing sparks, of greatness, but then both inevitably just not able to focus enough to keep their mentality up.
Yeah, but okay, I'm prepared to cut Dubois a little bit of slack. I mean, but the thing is, obviously, like what happened in Columbus, now what happened in Winnipeg, and now he gets the money in LA, and he's clearly not showing up to the expectations that they had for him. I remember talking in a press scrum with Don Granato earlier this year, and he was talking about Dylan Cousins and Owen Power and how they both signed big deals, and they both were really struggling, and to the point that Cousins was expressing a lot of frustration. He says, essentially, I'm making big money now. They expect this out of me, and I have to show up. Okay, well, these players, once they get the big money, there's pressure on them, and some of them rise to the occasion, and some of them shrink. And right now, Dubois, I mean, he's a big problem for the Kings. It's not as big a problem as the fact that they don't have a goaltender, and Rob Blake still hasn't traded for one, and that might solve some of their problems, but it's a big problem for them.
But the issue is, he got to where he wanted to get to. I'm sorry, Russ, but he got to where he wanted to get to. Like, he's a player who this is where he wanted to play, right? They're always, okay, playing in Columbus. No, I don't want to play in Columbus. Playing Winnipeg, I don't want to play Winnipeg, but I've always wanted to play for LA. Yeah. That's good, Russ. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I think Dubois pushed himself in the corner. I think when you sign guys like Cousins, though, you are signing for future, for future production.
Right.
So I think that, a lot of times those guys get over it. But I think with Rob Blake, I think he's in trouble. I think if they don't go 2 or 3 rounds in these playoffs, I think he's in trouble.
I wanted to make a point on 2 things. One, on the uniqueness of Ryan Johansson, and then also in terms of maybe we're seeing kind of a different rebuild with Detroit. And with Johansson, what I wanted to bring up is usually when you have a player like Johansson, a guy that has never performed to the level of expectation that he had when he was drafted, he's unsympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
But Johansson is sympathetic.
You're right.
He's so well liked.
He's a nice guy.
You ask anybody who's played with him, they just love this guy. Like, he's a nice guy. And with him, you hear, it just turned out he wasn't quite as good as, we all thought. He was, like, they don't blame him.
Right. What's better as a player,
Like, he's so likable. I mean, that's what I'm told. I've been told that. And I've talked to him a few times, and he seems like a nice guy. But, like, I know that the Predators really liked him.
Well, look at Matt Duchene, too, another likable guy.
That was what I was going to bring up.
Although he was not sympathetic. Like, they
no.
They thought, like, when the Nashville stuff went on here with them getting their concert canceled to YouTube and stuff, there was a thought was, we thought all this was behind us when we got rid of Matt Duchene. And now, obviously it wasn't,
So right. Remember, the talk was Matt Duchene went to Nashville because, he's a guitar player. He likes to perform, all that stuff. And then, he goes to Dallas. He's second on the team in scoring. And when they go to Nashville after the game, where is he? He's at one of the bars playing on his guitar.
Yeah. So no, but the other thing I wanted to bring up, because I think this is fascinating, and it just occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. we think of a rebuild as you go to the draft, you draft a bunch of people, you filter them in, it takes time. And then there's the other thing called a retool, where you just change everybody. But Yzerman is rebuilding, but not in the strictest sense. Like, everybody's talking about, last night Carberry said, this Detroit team right now is as good as any team in the league. Like, I mean, they got it all going on. They've scored 5 or more goals in a third of their games. Think about that.
Yeah.
5 or more in a third of their games. They cycle the puck, they move it, they control the puck. They're 4th in the league in scoring. They got a goaltender. Lions doing it all. Well, people are talking about, well, finally, it's taken Steve a long time, Yzerman. Yeah, but he's only got 2 draft picks on the team.
Yeah,
2 of his guys.
Yeah,
he has Lucas Raymond and Sider. Now those are good players.
Yeah,
but the rebuild in Detroit that's arrived is a bunch of veteran guys that he either signed or he traded for.
Yeah.
So I mean, this may be the most unique rebuild. Now he'll have more next year,
right?
But
and the hope is, hope again. The hope is that these guys, these veteran guys, they instill these good habits into these young players, right? And that's what.
Well, I mean,
the young players aren't around.
We're also hoping on Alex Lyon. Like that's still a hope. I mean, he's a pretty good goalie, but Alex Lyon's still a hope at this point.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
But what Yzerman has done is put together an effective hodgepodge.
Yeah,
he's got one very good player that he had when he came into the organization in Dylan Larkin.
Yeah.
He has 2 premium draft picks in Raymond and Sider, and the rest are free agents and trades and pickups off of waivers. It's a different assemblage of talent that he had in Tampa Bay.
The look at the free agents too, because they're also people who have never really been able to find a long-term home.
Yeah,
right.
And he's not giving it to him because
he's not giving it to him, but he's giving them success.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember, I can't remember who said it, but an observation I heard a number of years ago, and it was the best 4th line players or depth role players are former top draft picks who never worked out.
Right.
And and look at what's on that. Look now, maybe not draft picks, maybe they're free agent, maybe they're college entries. Look at what's on that team.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like,
Well, the 4th line.
Maybe they all work out when you build out the right ecosystem for them.
Well, the 4th line of Detroit, right, in the last game includes Sprong and Fabre, who have a combined 30 goals. like how many?
Yeah, right.
How many 4th line players do you have?
Well, those are 2 players again who didn't find happiness in other places, who everybody thought were going to be really good. Both of them were very.
I think it was because of injury.
Fabre was also injury, but I think
that's right. Fabre was in, but again, to speak the uniqueness of a player, and there aren't many players like this. But Sprong, of course, we all know last year, in terms of points per minute played, I think led the league because he played less than 11 minutes. Well, he's not playing any more minutes than that in Detroit either. No. But one difference is how many 4th liners, because Fabre and Sprong both get power play time.
Right.
And usually you don't. But,
Sprong has always had this great shot, and
he does,
we all saw it when he was drafted, but the other parts of his game never came around.
No,
now,
they don't exist.
And I want to give Detroit credit because Detroit got not only Sprong playing that way, but Rasmussen too, because Rasmussen was just an offensive player and really nothing else when they drafted him. And at one point, you were wondering if he was going to work out, and they've extended him.
Yeah, no, they did extend him, and now, Jeff Blashill asked him to be Jordan Stahl, and at the time, Mark Stahl was in Detroit. And there was a lot of discussion about whether he could be that, but he is that. He's a guy that can check. He's a guy that can get 15 plus goals, and they've moved him up recently within the last 3 or 4 games to playing in the top 6. You know, he had been playing as a third liner, but you know they're doing all that. But you know, it's the same thing. Like I don't think any less. In fact, I think it's more impressive that Yzerman has built this team on a bunch of guys that he's picked up, and it's hard to play here. Like Justin Hall, he had probably his best 2 weeks as a Red Wing, and then somebody came back from injury, and he was out again. Like he's out, and like Lalana is almost apologetic. He said, you know, he's, you know, but you know, I got no room in the end because I got 6. But Gossesbeer said last night, I thought it was interesting too. He was just talking about depth and what does that mean? He goes, well, what it means is we have 15 players. He says, because I counted them, 15 players on this team that can play on the power play.
Right. Wow.
Yeah,
that's impressive. I mean,
yeah.
I want to talk about another couple guys that we haven't talked too much about in the trade, and you know that I've been chasing around a little bit. One being Anthony Duclair. An interesting pickup because I mean, remember last year Anthony Duclair was hurt in the playoffs for Florida. Had to start off really strong for the Panthers, then gets hurt, returns and never go back to mode. But he had a really strong year for the Panthers in general last year.
Right.
And you know, looked like for all intents and purposes that he was going to stay there, and then they just let him go. They let him walk, right? So now he's, you know, he's sort of in no man's land, and he's going to get moved. It was a 1-year deal. The teams I have on the chart right now for them, I have the Rangers at 30%, the Panthers at 30%. I'm maybe bringing him back in. LA at 20, Vancouver at 10, and Minnesota at 10.
I mean, everything I've heard from like all the, you know, the people reporting on Duclair connect him back to Florida, and it makes a ton of sense for one simple reason. If you look at Florida right now, and they're an extremely solid team. They beat Buffalo last night. They're getting great goaltending. Their defense is you know, with Ekblad and Montour back, their defense is 6 deep in terms of quality. They only have 4 offensive players after Verhaeghe, Reinhart, Barkov, and Tkachuk. It drops off the planet. They need another scoring winger. I would say, you know, guys like Lundell and Bennett and you know,
they're picking it up though. Those two guys,
right? But they need another scoring. And Duclair's not making a ton. I think he's making 3.1 or 3.2. So if San Jose retains 50%, that's a deal. The problem with this is Zito's got nothing to trade. He's got no draft picks. He's got, you know, very few prospects. So that's the only thing with Florida. I think they want to add, but I don't know if they can add because they don't have any.
You know, it's funny
about
the
creative. He has found ways before to do things.
Sure.
I know. I think he's got a few prospects he could trade, but he's like an enigma, Duclair. Like last year was his best playoffs. Before then, he really wasn't good in the playoffs, and I don't know. And he's having a marginal year. Like for the talent base that he has, you would always expect more from him. Always.
He's the kind of guy that looks amazing at times. Like we've talked about, like I a couple of years ago, my 30 wacky predictions said he was going to have a 40-goal season. Like, and it was best based off of like this is like 3 or 4 years ago, but based off of watching the goals that he did score were incredible goals. You know, he would just have this ability. He was obviously full of talent and full of speed and could do a bunch of things. But then, you know, he just disappears for long stretches of time.
Yeah, he's got 11 goals in 52 games right now, but that's second on the San Jose Sharks. So you have to say, you know, he's on a team that is terrible.
Another guy I really want to get Kevin's opinion on is Matthew Dumba, who's out there, and I've heard a lot of people interested in him as well. He is another year on his case. He didn't sign a
No, he's a free agent.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of somebody else. Sorry, I'm thinking of somebody else. So Matt Dumba I have right now with Colorado, Toronto, New Jersey, Florida, Philly, as the teams that I've heard connected. Many thoughts. That anything you've heard on Matt Dumba, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I heard that there's interest in him, and I know Jeff Merrick. I was on Jeff's show, and he has actually linked him possibly to Detroit.
Okay.
So I don't. I mean, I know the Red Wings are interested in another defenseman, even though they got 7.
Yeah.
But, Friedman reported, and I thought this was interesting that they wanted. Or actually, I think it was Merrick. Merrick reported that he talked to a GM that says, you know, they're looking for a defenseman that's smelly, you know, who is hard to play against, is a little rough, because they don't really have that. Other than Cider, but he's not smelly. He's great.
Right.
But so they're looking for just a guy. So and Dumba can play that style if you need to. He can be very hard to play against. So So I can see that, and right now I think the rental players are far more intriguing than players with term. But that's why I think Declare, just for the reason that Mike brought up about they don't have a lot of assets that they want to move. Declare won't cost you much.
No.
So you can give away a third round pick in 2027. So
the thing I heard about Dumba, because he's among, I think, every right-handed defenseman who's got a heartbeat has been connected to Toronto. There have been some criticisms of his defensive metrics that they haven't been there very good in Arizona. But, the Leafs do need that smelly type of right-handed, sort of not dirty, but, just physical. And Dumba is that. Dallas has been another team that's been connected to him. I've heard the because the Stars are looking for defensive help past, Lundell and Heiskanen. And I mean, he would be a pretty decent. And I think they're a little worried about the age on Ryan Suter. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I know that Toronto tried to sign Dumba in the summer, and they pivoted towards Klingberg because Dumba wanted over $5 million on a deal. And he ended up signing in Arizona for less than $4 million.
Yeah.
Arizona retains on him. Then I think a team like Toronto and Detroit makes some sense as well. Although, Kev, do they really need another defenseman if they're not playing?
I don't know. That's not. I think my feeling is I know what Friedman said or what Jeff Merrick said about the guy that's smelling, but I think they'd be interested in a top 4 defenseman just because they really would like to get a guy. But I think they would be more interested in the guy like Hanifin or Tanev or someone of that, or Chikrin, someone of that ilk, who really could be a big difference maker for them. And then they could perhaps trade Ali Mata back. I mean, they like Mata a lot. He's a very nice 6th defenseman. But it's if you could upgrade the defense, I think they would be more interested. But it'll be interesting. I mean, you just never know what Steve Yzerman is thinking.
Right. Well, Eck, I wanted to ask you this because you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. I mean, we're 9 days away from the deadline, and in the last few years, you started to see the deals break around now, and then the deadline day was dead. And I mean, everything that's being said out there is because they're trying to conserve that last little bit of cap space, the daily accrual. But I think things are sort of blocked here by Hanifin and more Tanev. And once that gets moved, then it all breaks free. Is that what you
think? I mean, I think that is playing into it. Tanev is definitely, a lot of teams are definitely interested in him for sure. Hanifin, I still think a lot of teams believe he's going to re-sign in Calgary at the end of the day. I talked to some people about that, and even though Hanifin is, he's out there for sure, I think that there's a feeling that that they're going to get him signed. The bigger logjam to me, honestly, is just the amount of teams that are still in the race. Like that, the fact that there's just a bunch of teams, and that I think is the bigger thing that's affecting. It's why it's dragging on longer.
Yeah, there's too many. There's too many teams. It's hard to make a decision.
Yeah, and it's who they are too.
Yeah, who they are.
Like the Penguins.
Right.
Like if they were a different team, they might have already given up the ghost, but because of the Penguins, they're hanging in there, and the New York Islanders are 10 behind Detroit. But Lamoriello, I think, is self-imposed pressure, and then the ownership pressure. I think he's gonna be active too, even if they're still 10 points out.
But Russ said it to me earlier today. They're not looking because we were going through the standings. They're not looking at Tampa, who's got 69 points, who's the second wild card. they're looking at Philadelphia, and there's 4 Metro Division teams: the Devils, the Capitals, the Penguins.
Yeah, they're all in there.
And they all have games in hand on the Flyers, and they see Drysdale getting hurt, and they see Ristolainen on injured reserve, and they see them. And they see the possibility of them trading Walker and Sealer and saying, okay, we got a chance here because this team might fold up in the next week and a half.
Flyers put Cal Peterson on waivers today, too.
What's that, Cap?
Yeah, I think they're bringing Sandstrom up. That's why they
bring Sandstrom up, right?
Yeah.
I do think they are looking at Tampa Bay, though. Like, Tampa has shown themselves to be vulnerable.
Well, Russ,
their defense isn't good, and I will tell you this. There was an adjustment the Flyers made in yesterday's game, Kev. Vasilevsky didn't look great at the beginning, but there was a 1-1 game for a while.
Yeah.
And then he looked shaky on a long shot, and the Flyers started shooting from long distance, and he had trouble. And they were going over his shoulder long distance. And that was the shakiest I'd seen Vasilevsky in a long time.
Well, I consider myself fairly knowledgeable of like the depth of NHL organizations. And I have to say, after Hedman and after Perbix, I don't know who the hell these guys on the Tampa Bay blue line are. I don't know them, and that's
a good blue line. It's not.
No, it's definitely hurting a lot. It is interesting. Remember last year there was question whether Ottawa was going to make a move. We're going to be buyers or sellers in the trade deadline, and then they blew 2 games like right before the deadline. They got killed by, I forget who it was. I think it was Detroit, right?
No, it's the other way around. Detroit.
Oh, the other way around, right? Detroit
was in the race late, and they lost back-to-back games, and then Yzerman traded Bertuzzi, and
right. That's what it was. I'm sorry.
People were crying. It was quite a mess. So.
I feel like we're at that with a couple teams in the next week here. Like I feel like we're at that. Pittsburgh wins last night. That throws them. If Pittsburgh loses last night, that could change. Pittsburgh they could beat the Flyers in that game too. Pittsburgh still thinks they have some hope going on too, and they are absolutely a team that's built. If they're sellers, that's a major life decision for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's like something we've never seen.
Well, 2006 was
right.
But
so
by the way, Kev, you wrote that piece about Bertuzzi for Detroit Hockey Now, and the hottest player in the NHL since you wrote it is Tyler Bertuzzi. He scored 5 or 6 goals in the last 4 or 5 games. He's been, so
that's motivation. He's so popular in Detroit. I'll just write that he's now the hottest player, and
Yeah, there you go. Right, you work. So I mean. The Predators are one of those teams too that Barry Trotz comes on the other day and they had the season ticket holder thing or whatever they had, and he says to them, people ask him about whether they're going to trade Saros, and he said he didn't come out and say he wouldn't, which was really interesting. First of all, because he said, but only if we're not in it, would I consider trading him?
Well, they're in it.
But they're in it, and they've won like 7 in a row, right? They've won a bunch of games in a row here too. So they're.
Although we did hear Dawson Mercer's name creep out with Saros talks with the Devils, and I can see why the Devils wouldn't make that deal, honestly.
Well, the funny thing is, if they trade Saros close to the deadline, it's the closest example to. And I don't think the Nashville Predators are going to go on and win the Stanley Cup. But if you remember, 1993, the Maple Leafs had Grant Fuhr and then a young Felix Potvin as his backup, and they knew Potvin was the starter, and they traded Grant Fuhr to Buffalo for Dave Andreychuk and a first-round pick. And the Andreychuk acquisition helped them get to within 1 game of the Stanley Cup final, and they had a goaltender in Potvin who played for most of the next decade.
Right.
Askarov is the Potvin in this scenario. Saros is a good goaltender. I don't know if you're going to get a Dawson Mercer out of New Jersey or you're going to get
That's the difference in today's hockey. Back then, teams were willing to do that. Now it takes a lot to develop a Dawson Mercer.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who don't believe that Saros can. Go ahead, Pete. You had something. Sorry about that.
No. I was just.
Okay. So no. So I agree with the there's a lot of talk about Saros being too small. A lot of around he's not big, small enough. He's too small to win it in the Eastern Conference. I think that's.
I said he's too small, but he's playing damn good.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't play, and he doesn't play in a weak division. In the Central Division, there's not a lot of wimpy teams in that division. It's not like that. It's not like the Metro Division is the big bad Patrick Division. It's really, to me, it's kind of bizarre. I did want to ask Pete one thing though, because I did just put Tanev as my favorite now for to go to the Winnipeg Jets. From talking to people today,
it wouldn't surprise me, but I'm curious what would be going back.
Yeah, me too.
Could
Go ahead, Mike.
Could Cole Perfetti be going back? Because I heard what was the talk is that Perfetti is not getting a lot of minutes there, and he's not exactly a favorite of the coach. Not to say that he's a bad player or he's doing anything wrong, but that he's just not being utilized for being the type of talent that he is.
So that's an interesting thought, because if you saw the comment from Rick Bowness, he was pressed about Perfetti the other day, maybe yesterday, and it came out. He said, well, I'm trying to keep him in the lineup.
Yeah.
Is that a vote of confidence?
No.
I can't recall the last time I heard a coach say.
Only a coach as old as Bonus would say something like that. Like he's like, right? That to me is like, that's nuts.
I'd be surprised if they were going to give up on him that early.
Mm-hmm.
But that would mean then, and Russ, you could back this up, that probably any of the prospects that we've talked about in the past are off the table then.
McGroarty
well, McGroarty's not going anywhere.
McGroarty's not having a good year, but I ran into him the other day, and I think that's just like circumstance. I think he could get back on track without a problem.
But I think we talked about Lucius. We talked about
Lucius
Lambert.
might be the only guy they're willing to part with because he's had an injury history. But you can see he can play, and I'd be shocked if they really would do that.
Yeah. Listen, last night I had the fortune of sitting right behind the Jets bench.
Nice.
Beside the runway, the tunnel.
Yeah.
I think anyone who writes about hockey should spend
a
game there.
Yep.
I couldn't pay attention to the game because I was so fascinated by watching what was on the bench. Like, it was blowing my mind the way the coaches moved in and out. You could hear little things. And what was super interesting was last night there was a fight between, I think, Shen and Lowry.
Yeah.
Something happened and Bones went, no, Adams lines up next. Next thing you know, Lowry's he and Shen are pounding each other.
Right.
Like, I didn't even see what triggered it. It was so fascinating the way they do things. But what was really interesting is Rick Bowness is thought of very highly with the Jets. I think a lot of the team thinks him as a bit of a father figure type coach. He's very distant away from Perfetti. And so to that point, Mike, you bring that up. He's reaching in, he's talking to guys. He didn't really do that with Perfetti much. And you wonder, like, because I think if I'm correct, this is the end of Bones' contract. And are they going to sign him again or not? And if they're going to keep him, and I don't see why they wouldn't if he wants to stay.
He's played well. Coach well.
Then if Perfetti's not his guy and you're going to lock him in, like lock Bones in for another, if he's taking another deal, it's probably going to be for 3 years. That might become expendable. I just don't know if they do it for a rental of Tanev.
Right. And
you can't trade Cole Perfetti for that.
Right.
No, that's the point, Mike. Like, there's got to be something bigger in there.
If you got kind of assurance that you could, if he was going to stay, perhaps.
I mean, his brother played in Winnipeg, so I'm sure he knows what it would be like to play in Winnipeg. But I agree, you can't trade a young asset for a guy that you don't know. And this is my argument in what I wrote today for Hockey Buzz about like the players that Toronto shouldn't trade for, and one was Walker, who I just don't think is the right fit, and the second one was Tanev. And and not for the reason that he's not a good defenseman, because he's a really good defenseman and he would satisfy all the needs that Toronto was looking for. It's just, you don't trade a first round pick for a 34-year-old defenseman who's a rental if you think you can get that guy in the summer. And I think the Leafs are the leading candidate to get a Toronto native in Tanev as a free agent. You don't trade a first round pick for a guy that you may get in the summer.
We just don't do that, Mike. But yesterday we talked about that. We're going to talk about it on Monday. But the reality is, like, you can't also just throw away a season like this from us.
I'm not saying throwaway season. I'm not saying throwaway season, but I'm saying don't
do everything you can.
You don't if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, you don't have any draft capital for the next 2 years if you trade their first round pick next year. You don't have a first and second next year. You don't have a first and second the following year.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. I'm not saying don't trade for an Ilya Lyubushkin or a third round pick or something for Matt Dumba. Those deals are those work almost just as well. You don't trade a first round pick for a guy that you might get in the summer. You just don't do it.
I think you just trade Marner for Pettersson and Vancouver's first.
There you go. The last thing I want to throw, because we're running out of time, and I really wanted to get Kevin's opinion on this. A guy's name came for the first time today with at least with the people I've been talking to, and that was Adam Larson out in Seattle.
Yeah, everybody likes him.
Yeah.
Shot blocker, tough, good one-on-one defender.
Yeah.
So,
but I have to ask this question, Kev. Why would Ron Francis trade him?
He wouldn't. It would have to be an overwhelming offer for him. What's his contract status?
I'll look it up right now.
I don't know. I figured it was something probably reasonably soon. It was ending because
he's got another year at $4 million.
One more year at 4.
Yeah, I mean that's a real reasonable price for him. But I know a lot of teams love him, but
they do.
I just don't see them parting with him.
Well, they seem to be the rumor du jour because Will Borgen is another name that has been talked about. He's got another year. I mean, there are teams out there that would rather give up a draft pick to get a player who's got term left, like Mario Ferraro in San Jose or Borgen in Seattle, than give up the same amount for a rental. And I get that because then you have cost certainty. But Seattle wants to be competitive. They want to make the playoffs next year. So. Right. A right-hand defenseman in Larson, you just don't give them up.
Yeah. I don't see
them. All right. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. Really quick show as always. We'll be back again on Friday. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Enjoy your evening.